Julie and Lisa had an article in the Australian recently which talks about religious exclusivity in terms of morality, dignity, and ethics. And I found it a bit horrific to view the concept of ethics, dignity, and a sense of humanity as being only encompassed by those of a religious faith. And because we have people such as Scott Morrison, who belongs to one of the happy clappers of our times, and he does not show any of the qualities that Lisa is talking about in this particular article. And it's almost as if in order to be a decent human being, for any particular reason, you need to belong to a religious faith. And I find this notion a bit horrific because, firstly, I'm not a Christian, I'm an atheist. And secondly, it's like saying if anybody, so it's us and them type mentality where we're saying that because this particular group of people have a different view of the world than us, therefore they don't have a sense of morality. And it's offensive at the least. It's absolutely incomprehensible that an intelligent being like Lisa would even make such an assertion. But it is an attack on the left of politics because they argue that the left is trying to take away their rights in terms of schools and the basic principles that they believe in. What we are doing on the left are challenging some of those versions of Christianity which need to be challenged. And need I remind you that it was the priesthood in particular in the Roman Catholic Church that has spent many, many decades fighting against the notions that there are a whole host of pedophile rings within the Roman Catholic fraternity, and particularly obviously the priesthood. So we are fighting against this. They are trying to hold this up as being something of value to them. And really, when one looks at it, it's very little value whatsoever. I mean, we've now got Hillsong Church where the leader of Hillsong father was involved with sexual abuse of children. We have a myriad of Anglican churches and other organisations, Christian organisations, that are supposedly out doing all this fabulous good work, abusing kids and others. So they do not have the moral high ground here, yet seem to be making the argument that they do. And in Lisa's argument here, which is Labor's ideological war on faith, a threat to dignity and morality. Well, I would suggest that the dignity and morality has gone out the window a long, long time ago, which has nothing to do with Labor, but which has simply to do with right-wing religious fanatics who believe that they are above the law and can do whatever they like to children and others. And in this article, he talks about in the same way DFE sustain Andrew Hastie, who's a SAS officer or something, and indeed me. So Australians' faith communities sustain so much of our country. Do they? That's an interesting notion in itself. Our churches, synagogues, temples and places of religious worship are the foundation for thousands of schools, hospitals, homeless shelters, refugees for women and children, and services supporting new immigrants and people with a disability. And yes, I guess one could argue that that is true, that a lot of the charities are set up by churches, and all credit to them. I'm not disputing that one iota. Governments haven't been able to step into the breach for whatever reason, and churches have because they believe that they do hold the moral high ground, and so therefore they need to look after the poor, their parishioners and whatever. I'm not going to argue they've done a good job of that because I don't believe that they have, but nevertheless they've stepped into the breach where governments were not able to do so or chose not to do so. Fault of the governments for actually allowing that to happen in the first place. Even though I am rather sceptical as to whether governments could do a reasonable job either. Don't believe anybody can. However, the point that he's making is that it's the churches that are doing all this. It doesn't mean that they are doing it from the best of motives, because these organisations, Anglicare and others, earn hundreds of millions of dollars a year from the government purse to run these services. The CEOs and people within those organisations, the leaders of those organisations, are paid hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to run them. So it's a business, it's a corporation. We might be under the guise of a church, but nevertheless, it's just a corporation, right? Run by a church, using our money, my money, and atheist money, to organise activities, services, and whatever for the most vulnerable people in our community. It's my money that's doing that. I'm not saying you have to give that money to the Roman Catholic Church to run their schools. However, that is what they're doing. It goes on to say, despite the good work, we are seeing Australia's religious communities under great ideological pressure from the extreme left. What a load of bullshit. It goes on to say, the Archbishop is not from the mark. Already, the groundwork is being laid by federal Labor to ideologically neuter the religious ethos of Australia's religious schools. And so they should be. Someone should make a stand for the kids that are having to suffer some of the crap that they're sold by religious leaders within schools, because they do not represent what the society is representing or saying on a general basis, because they are not abiding by, there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of homophobia, there's a lot of discrimination happening within these schools. It does probably everywhere, I agree, yet they're not dealing with those particular issues on the whole. Supported by Federal Labor Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, the Australian Law Reform Commission is laying the foundation for a comprehensive overhaul of religious practice in our non-government schools. Now, so be it, but I don't necessarily see it as being a bad thing, because what we need to look at is what your money and my money is paying for when it comes to schools. And I have a little clip here which we can't quite see all of, and hopefully I'll make an adjustment to that. No, I can't. But what it says is, in 2013, maybe I'll make it there. I don't know whether that's working either. But it basically says, in 2023, current funding for schools is estimated to total $27.3 billion, total funding. This includes $10.6 billion to government schools, $9.3 billion to Catholic schools, and $7.4 billion to independent schools. $10.6 billion to government schools, and a total of nearly $17 billion to independent schools. So when pardon me. So when Les is talking about the fact that, for whatever reason, the government's trying to limit the ethos within religious schools, the funding tells us something completely different. It isn't. It's simply, at the end of the day, we should be putting more money. These schools who have large fees, anyway, a lot of them, are still receiving substantive funds from the government. So, this needs to be looked at, because we need to be able to make decisions about where this funding should go appropriately. And my belief is, and I hope you agree with me, that most of this funding should be going to public schools. Public schools are missing out because most of the money is going to the private sector. Now, a lot of people will argue that if people chose not to send their kids to private schools, then they would, there'd be a lot of kids who kind of would be schoolless or whatever. I don't know what the argument would be, but basically they're saying that these schools provide better quality in terms of education. Well, may do, because they're having to pay their teachers more than what they would in the public sector. And secondly, I don't know whether they're still getting better teachers. And I think that the Teachers Association would argue that they're not necessarily getting better teachers, even though the teachers might be better paid. So this argument about moral ground is completely false. And unless a bloke who is going to make a stand for the Voice and the Yes campaign needs to get some credit for that, because maybe this is where he's making his moral stand. But when it comes to education, there's not a good argument to suggest that Labor are focusing on getting rid of government schools. Of public schools. They're not. They are still funding public schools, private schools, more so than they are public schools. So it's a hollow argument, and it does distress me that they insist on taking the moral ground which they do not have not earned. And it's been proved time and time again that these organisations are without morality, without ethics, and particularly the Roman Catholic Church refuses to pay what it should be paying to those people whom its priests have abused. So to argue that, I think, is a fallacy and needs to be called out as such. I'd be interested to know what you think in that, and that if you would like to subscribe to my page, that would be great. It'd be nice to hear from you as well in any of the comments down below. Okay, that's my bit on schools and Lesser. And hopefully we can all make a stand against this sort of crap that comes out from the right wing in particular. Take care of yourself, everybody. Look after yourselves. And more importantly, be safe.